Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host, Brian Tankersley. We spent the week together at CES, and we'd like to talk to you about personal technology that we saw. Now, when we pick off personal technology, it's kind of business oriented and kind of not. We are so intermingled in our business and personal lives. We know a lot of personal technology becomes technology that you use for business. One example of that is the Grand Pad. Now, the Grand Pad is an interesting design concept. The goal here is to be able to support elderly parents or clients that you're trying to protect their identity, if you will. And it turns out that the Grand Pad concept, I think, is going to be useful for a long time. Now, the founder, Scott Lean, who is the CEO, formerly worked at Intuit in their banking division. And he was concerned about the security and the ease of use of devices. And so they have created a product that can do restricted cell phone calls, secured email, restricted and protected websites, private video calls to Zoom and Teams and other approaches, that has a secure camera and more, and it has additional live support. Now, the tablet, I think, could be used as the only device by the target audience here. And the target, by the way, they said was 75 years old and above. And they claimed that they had one user that had been 116 years old using the product. It also has a cell phone application so you can actually interact with the users. The product itself, $449. The subscription costs are $65 to $95 a month. Live people, US based, are taking the calls and so forth. So, Brian, that's kind of my quick run on it.
Yeah, the 65 to 95. Some of you are going, I don't think so. But remember that the $95 a month plan, and I think maybe the $95 a month plan, as I recall, also includes unlimited 4G cellular. So this is really a tablet replacement for a cell phone. And it's designed to be locked down such that you can call certain people, and you can lock it down to where you can only call certain people if you want, with it. And so it's think of it as kind of a walled garden approach to computing for folks. I lost both of my parents over the last 5 years or so, and I remember in their late years, they really struggled to deal with technology, and they were very much subject to suggestion. One of my friends' late father actually spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, lost hundreds of thousands of dollars to scammers who said they were going to post pictures of him accessing porn on the web to his family and to publicly and everything. And it was very embarrassing for him, and so he just paid it. Unfortunately, that meant that he pretty much ran out of money around the end of his life, and so it was really a sad tale because he spent mid six figures on these scams. And so the idea of protecting people from this, the idea of making things easier, I think about the work I did 25 years ago, helping some people use basic computers back then that were significant clients of the firm. And I think this is something that comes in with the advisory piece that we have, in that we're doing things that are not traditional tax and accounting. We're protecting these people. We're making their lives better. And sometimes it means we step out and do weird things. Like, the guy I knew that was a managing partner that used to help a lady buy a new Cadillac every year. It wasn't in his job description, but the client was thrilled to have the assistance, and he actually owned a minority interest in a car dealership, and so he was quite successful at it.
Yeah,
So
and if you take it
this
like
is in that
this,
same vein.
It is. And if you take it like this with perhaps high net wealth clients who could be scammed, providing this and then helping their family members connect might be good. Now, the $65 a month plan, by the way, you're correct. It includes the 4G LTE data, all of their apps, which is voice and video calling, email, photo, the camera, the calendar, the internet browser, and the companion app for you to use on your cell phone, as well as the regular updates. And they'll do a warranty replacement on the device if there's any downtime. So on their website, they actually list all of those things and more, including emergency 911 calling and phone number portability, and this idea of 24 by 7 by 365 live customer support being designed for seniors with no spam or scam calls. And they also have volunteer people. They gave it a name. I've forgotten the name today, to just talk.
Ambassadors.
Ambassadors. Thank you. Just to talk with people. Again, a pretty interesting doggone design. Well,
The one thing I'll say about it too is that, my observation for the last 3 years of my father's life, when he was in a assisted living facility and then a memory care facility, um, Dad was extremely lonely, and I feel so bad about it because he had to get away from his home. He had to give up all his tools. He had to give up his pets. He had to move to this new place with new people that he didn't know, and he was not in a place where he was absorbing new tricks very well. And so I think this giving people community and resources and ways to communicate with people, including doing video chat, which is, not the simplest things for people to pick up. I think this is a really powerful tool that can make a big difference in the lives of your high net wealth clients. And the one thing that they actually talked about that they're planning on doing in the future is setting up a setup where you can have an icon for yourself or for somebody at your firm. You can have an approved icon for somebody that is a trusted contact so that they can contact you when they have questions. And so it's an real interesting offering, I think.
it is. Well, besides GrandPad, there was also evolution in the ATSC 3.0 technologies. Now, that technology is 4K free streaming of TV content. There were new devices. One in particular that caught our attention was called MyVelo, which allows the integration of paid services like Netflix and YouTube and Prime Video, Disney Plus, and more. But the device is $100. And the device is supposed to get a 4G extension and Wi-Fi for another $100. The person that explained this to us indicated that you could run a VPN from your home to your vacation home to your office and so forth to run this video content in multiple places. And the 4K free streaming services on ATSC are good. Now, we were surprised that not more of the country got covered during this past year. Last year, 75% of the country was covered. This year, it was 76% of the country. So to me, that's not a lot of movement. But the last year, I actually had recommended the ATSC 3.0 products and wound up buying a number of these, including the one from Freecast, which did two ATSC 3.0 ports and two ATSC 1.0 ports. And Freecast also has a little bit of this type of streaming technology, but not at this low price point. The Freecast was $200, whereas this one's only $100. So, Brian, I hope I captured that fairly correctly. Other things that you might mention about the ATSC 3.0 or these devices?
No, I think you got it right. I think what's happening here is that the over-the-air component is something that's kind of coming back. For many years, in the 90s and 2000s, we only had cable. We didn't have antennas. And now what we're finding is that a lot of the content, especially live sports that's on network television, is harder to stream over the wire. And so in many cases, we can get a lot of free content, including DVRing that content, which is one of the things I've been doing quite a bit lately. I'm building my own library, DVRing that content onto a box, and so it's kind of nice because I don't have to have the streaming subscription for things. And frankly, many of the things that I like to watch haven't been available to stream, things from my childhood and so forth. And so it's nice to be able to go in and again to access all of that content that's available on all of these different channels. Because even though you think of Knoxville, Tennessee, where I live, which back in the day had basically four or five channels. You had the ABC, NBC, CBS, and then you had a PBS station, and then maybe an independent. So maybe five channels here in town. But now there's no less than 25 channels because of all these the My TVs, the antenna TVs, there's even shopping networks that have like Jewelry TV that have broadcast stations in here. Now, I don't expect to DVR and watch much Jewelry TV, but it's interesting nonetheless that the amount of free content that's available just for the price of hanging up an antenna and getting it.
Yeah. And I'm anxious to see what you write about in your home networking course this year and how that evolves because, the Tableau TV that I use for DVR purposes has a new version as well. And, I think people are getting somewhat exhausted of so many subscriptions, paid for subscriptions.
And
And
and and,
so,
and having to switch between the inputs on most TVs is not a lot of fun when you have to have these external devices. And so it's nice to have one that will do it all.
yeah. Now, another thing that both of us got to try, and we made an appointment to do this, was the Lumen Glass. It's a assistive device for blind. It's built on the concept of a self-driving car and has a lot of the same processing technology in the headset. Now, the headset's supposed to run for 2 to 3 hours. And, part of the issue was the expense of maintaining guide dogs was high. We have a lot of the training cost related to a guide dog, not to mention the ongoing care. So,
Yeah, and they stated that over the lifetime of a guide dog, it was about 10 years of service and about $200,000. And that's simply not scalable for 3 million blind people.
and right now, only about 2,000 guide dogs are being trained trying to service 300 million blind people. Now, it turns out the founder here was, well, most of his family have visual disabilities. So that was part of his motivation. But I found that I learned how to walk with this fairly quickly. And I think a blind person can. And the goal is that through charitable gifts and perhaps governmental purchases, that they'll be able to supply these headsets globally. They are already doing it in Europe with about 400 users. So we wanted you to be aware of this haptic, guide piece, which I thought was pretty cool.
Now, don't get too excited about this yet. It still feels like a 1.0. In fact, I think some of the case was actually 3D printed as opposed to being created in injection molding and so forth. And so it still is not quite as robust as I would hope it would be for something that somebody was going to live and die by and going to frankly drop quite often. Um, and so it's an interesting 1.0 device, and I think this is one to definitely stay tuned for. And if you're willing to be a bleeding edge person and potentially, I think it could make a big difference for somebody that in your life that has visual impairment.
Absolutely.
Okay, next we have this hydrogen power storage tool. One of the big problems with hydrogen storage is that it tends to make metal containers brittle, and it really causes significant damage to them. Again, the hydrogen ions are just pretty brutal. And so this is a device called High Viva, and what it's designed for is if you have solar panels or if you have some other way of generating electricity, this is a way of storing that electricity for times when you don't have that. I think about the snowstorm that we're in the middle of, the snowpocalypse that's taking place right now outside in my home as we record this on January 10th. And it strikes me that this could be almost like some of those whole home backup batteries that we've seen show up other places. So it is containerized and modularized, so you can stack different levels of these things in for you. So like if you look at this device, in this one you have I don't know what the top part does. I think it's the part that stores and retrieves. But then on the bottom you have three levels of these cylinders that are actually containing the hydrogen in it. And the hydrogen, interestingly enough, is stored in solid form as opposed to in gas or liquid or any other kind of form. And so it's a very, very interesting approach that they're taking. And I think again, I think as we try to explore and make alternative energy much more successful, and we try to exploit all of these things, so we don't necessarily have to build the biggest future power grids because of these little micro cells like this. Um, this actually looks pretty interesting.
Hmm. And we talked about the hydrogen cells being used in aircraft out of Australia in the past year. And also in the past year, talked about the Echo Flow system. And those people were also at CES this year. But these concepts, are important, I think, because we just don't have the wherewithal to rebuild our grid right now. So, Brian, I think that gets us to kind of the next thing that I know you got excited about, but I understand why. Because, the ability to have small businesses doing specialty work is important. We've seen a lot of this makers type of world, but one product you said, "Oh, we got to go look at the X tool." And I said, "Oh, okay, Brian, we'll go." "Oh, yeah, Brian, you were right. We should have looked at this." So,
Well, the cool thing about this, it's about a 2000, they have different levels of devices, but this is at its core, the device that I'm looking at is about $2,000, and it will do the same kind of cutting and shaping and printing as a Cricut. So it will print, it will cut labels, it will go in and do laser engraving. It will also do laser cutting of wood and light materials. Um, and including engraving in metal. And so it was quite interesting to see these devices because I think about, my wife's in sales and she works with realtors who are also in sales. And I think about this ability to mass customize with small lots. And these tools like Xtool are quite interesting for that, just because there's so many places where it'd be nice to be able to make this or make that or make something that looks a little more professional than something that just got printed out on Avery labels that you stuck on some kind of device. Um, and this really struck me as something for both the maker slash hobbyist, as well as somebody that's in some kind of branding, where they could actually create all kinds of amazing things with it. The new interesting part about these is that they have some new AI-based software that will help you create custom art to go on these things. And so it's a very interesting set of devices. And again, the concept of having a device that can do inkjet printing, that can cut labels and can do laser engraving as well as laser cutting of wood becomes very, very interesting in a very short period of time in a $2,000 device.
yeah, and with AI Make, there's software that drives all that. It's pretty interesting what can be done, and they're trying to scale it up with belt feeds and other pieces. But many of the other competitive tools that we'd seen at prior CESs, and they were still there this year, are $10,000 or more per unit. And here at 2 or 4,000, you got a deal that the do-it-yourself enthusiast can actually build a business and sell custom things that.
Well, and that's the thing is that it's for some people it is kind of a gamble, and a $2,000 gamble, the hurdle you have to make a $2,000 gamble work is quite different than the hurdle you have to have for a $10,000 gamble. So it looked very, very interesting. It looked like something if you had somebody that, if you had a couple where maybe they wanted to do some woodworking and then she also wanted to do some scrapbooking and crafting kind of things, it strikes me that they could both use this and make great use of it in a huge amount of different ways.
Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
this one's a sad one to talk about because again, as Brian said earlier, we're recording this on January 10th, and we discovered a product called the Delphi Wildfire Detection Unit, which is designed to detect wildfires at a 10-mile range. Now, we said, oh my, wouldn't these be great to install in places like California and Hawaii and so forth? But that was before the massive fire that's been, that destroyed so much there was there. And
Yeah, we literally saw it on Tuesday of this week, which was during the day, and we said, well, maybe this isn't going to be very valuable. And then Tuesday night suddenly California caught on fire, and Pacific Palisades and Hollywood just had this catastrophic apocalyptic fire. I mean, it's crazy.
mhm. So again, our sympathy and concern goes out for that. We did have dinner with people who were from Southern Cal, and they were taking calls during the dinner and so forth. But these types of devices, Internet of Things devices that can provide us some safety, make sense, and we've seen them on all sorts of frameworks, not only this wildfire detection, and I read about another one on the flight out to CES this year that I mentioned to Brian. But, bottom line here is we're going to see not only fire detection, but also noise and other pieces as well.
Okay,
Now,
Tony's.
now
Randy,
last
this
year,
this is one that's near and dear to your heart because of
well,
your
it is
grandchildren.
because last year I discovered the Tonys, a small cube that will actually play music and read stories and so forth to young children. And I met the founder this year. Last year I didn't get to meet the founder, but they have added new Tonys, new types of storylines and others that can go with this. And so just be aware that the Tonys are still doing well. And, one of my grandchildren is the proud owner of a Tony. And, this is probably going to be a can of worms, a Pandora's box I shouldn't have opened. But some of the new pieces include Thomas the Tank Engine lines and many others. So again, if you're not familiar with the Tonys, TONIES, it is a wonderful gift for small children.
And for those of us that have Asperger's children like mine, he's 22 now, but I remember how endeared he was with Thomas the Tank Engine back in the day. We have to acknowledge the passing of Britt Allcroft, the lady who really developed the Thomas the Tank Engine series and probably got the gross national product of India out of my family when my son was small. So interesting times.
Well, one other projector that, I observed and thought it was a fine product. It took very little space, came from XGI MI. It was a pop up projector. You could literally, put this at the end of an office or the end of a family room and literally pop it up, and the projector created a fine 4K image. And rather than having a big screen on the wall all the time or whatever, I thought this was a better solution than many of the other pop up monitors that I'd seen in the past. So just be aware that there's still going to continue to be many different options for viewing images in your homes and in your offices. Let's face it, many of our offices have big screen TVs instead of projectors today. And we know that personal technology often winds up becoming business technologies. Let's see, can you say smartphone as an example? And we see many, many more to come.
Now, this is one that I'm putting in here just because my wife, super banker, is my true north when it comes to will people actually use this technology. She has for a long time wanted a VW bus. And so we actually saw two of these very close to each other. This is an electric self-driving VW van, and it was it had the round on the front like the bus. It wasn't nearly as boxy as the buses from the 1960s, but I thought this was particularly apropos. This would be particularly apropos because I could use it. I could use it in in the for-profit part of my business to get me from place to place, and then I could also use it in my Schedule F with my bees because of the hexagons on the side of it. So it was a very interesting thing, but it also I want to call out here because when you look at this device, you can see some of the different ports and cameras and lidar devices and lasers and radar pods and everything else on these devices. You know, these self-driving cars. You know, it's been a while. They're still out there. They're doing okay. But but again, I think about the snow that I have going on right now, and based on all of my understanding of it, the snow would pretty much shut down a self-driving car in here. So we still have significant challenges to overcome with those. But so we haven't given up on self-driving cars, but I can tell you that my wife was quite excited about the concept of getting shuttled the 30 minutes each way it is to work to her as opposed to her having to drive. Then I told her the price would probably be mid six figures, and she said, "Well, maybe not this year." So it's the self-driving cars. We couldn't talk about personal without at least addressing self-driving cars, and I'm glad that we did, but it's a not quite yet, I
Yeah.
guess is the way I'd say it.
But we did enjoy the self driving tractor from John Deere, which could be used in grove work. And of course, the big boy tractors and cats and everything
Yeah,
else that we got
this
to see.
they had this 830 horse tractor that it looked more like a moving electric power plant or something. It was based on I don't believe it was electric, but it was just a absolute hoss.
Yeah,
It was
we were basically told that you could farm straight up mountains with it. It had so much horsepower, which was being used in Canada for that very purpose. Well, you can tell that Brian and I do enjoy reporting for you the major breakthroughs of CES. Hopefully, these personal items give you a little bit of insight of what's happening on that side as well. And Brian, any parting thoughts on CES for 2025?
I think we're going to have to wait and see. As we said in the previous podcast, I thought this year was kind of a ho hum. I kind of referred to it as a science fair that was run by kids who didn't do their homework because there wasn't a whole lot of new innovation in it this year. I subsequently learned that Samsung and many of the others are running their own standalone events here in the next few weeks. I suspect they're trying to compensate for the uncertainty surrounding the political situation in the U.S. and in the other countries that had significant elections over the last year or so, and the potential impact on supply chains of those things. But it's an interesting time, and again, the technology keeps advancing, and they keep blowing us away with some of the things that they do.
That is absolutely the case. We appreciate you listening in, and we'll talk to you again soon in another accounting technology lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.